Hello, everyone. I hope you're well hearing me well. Welcome, everyone, to this webinar on monitoring and evaluation of Brazilian SUL trilateral cooperation, focusing on capacity development and social protection. Warm welcome to those participating with us today right now, and also to those who will watch us later on. My name is Waisbich. I'm a researcher associated with Articulação SUL, the South-South Cooperation Research and Policy Center based in São Paulo, Brazil. ASUL is a think tank working on research, public debate, and public engagement to promote and support South-South cooperation initiatives. ASUL has partnering with governments and international organizations to enhance our knowledge on South-South policies and practices. And since 2015, ASUL has also been involved in a range of South-South cooperation, South-South trilateral cooperation evaluation initiatives as an external evaluator. And in the course of doing so, it has promoted dialogue spaces for academics and practitioners to reflect on the very practices of evaluating South-South cooperation and South-South trilateral cooperation. And this webinar, together with socialprotection.org, is thus part of this larger intent to promote dialogue on South-South cooperation in general, and also on monitoring and evaluation of South-South cooperation in particular. So we thank Social Protection very much, the team, for this opportunity and for the partnership. I'm going to be brief in my introduction. So this webinar has as main objective to foster this qualified debate on current and future challenges of South-South trilateral cooperation monitoring and evaluation practices. It seeks to build upon participants to move this debate forward and move this monitoring and evaluation agenda forward, not only in terms of Brazil and Brazilian South-South cooperation, but also for those grappling with those same issues in other countries or from other international organizations. So we have a range of very, very qualified and interesting participants with us today, both as speakers, but I'm pretty sure also in terms of the attendees. And based on the practical experience, or their practical experience in monitoring and evaluation, the speakers we have today will be reflecting on and helping us to move this debate forward beyond the consensus that we have built in the past years for those studying and practicing South-South cooperation and trilateral cooperation in the past years. So to be very brief, when we talk about the consensus on capacity development, dimensions of South-South trilateral cooperation and social protection, we have actually achieved some kind of consensus in terms of using capacity development and looking at the results and impacts in these dimensions and the multiple dimensions of capacity development. But now, and the reason why we wanted to bring this webinar is to reflect a little bit beyond. And we have actually 4 axes that we want to propose for you in terms of collective reflection. The first one is on South-South trilateral cooperation monitoring and evaluation purposes. So we want our speakers to reflect today on how do their organizations use monitoring systems and evaluation results. And once they embark on this effort, how exactly those monitoring and evaluation initiatives are being used. We also have another intention to discuss lessons learned from those monitoring and evaluation initiatives. So what are the main lessons learned regarding monitoring and evaluation of South-South and South-South trilateral initiatives, focusing on capacity development? What are the challenges regarding those initiatives? And also, what are the new frontiers for us to reflect on beyond capacity development? So for instance, how to incorporate impact on indirect beneficiaries, how to connect the discussion around capacity development and the SDGs, so impact on SDGs, how to measure expenditures, how to discuss efficiency in South-South and South-South trilateral cooperation, and many others. So very concretely, we have an interesting program for today's session. We have 3 speakers and sharing their views for 15 minutes each. And we have around 40 minutes for Q&A with the participants in the webinar. So you are more than welcome to share your questions with us, share your comments with us. And actually, you have this the webinar chat, so please do so. And when doing so, do mention your name if you want the affiliation or the country you are actually listening us to, because this will also help me and us to organize a Q&A session. And what I'm going to be moderating this discussion, and what I'm going to be doing right now is just to briefly introduce our speakers one by one. So we have the first speaker we have today is Guilherme Dantas Nogueira from the Brazilian Cooperation Agency, ABC. Guilherme has a PhD in sociology. He works for the Brazilian Cooperation Agency as a project analyst. He is responsible for managing trilateral South-South cooperation projects with different international organisms, including ILO, UNICEF, and UNFPA. Our second presenter today, it's Niklas Stephan from UNICEF Brazil. Niklas has 10 years of experience with UNICEF, including in areas of program management, strategic planning, gender mainstreaming, knowledge management, and South-South cooperation. Niklas formed part of the team of UNICEF Brazil that in 2011 and 2012 set up the first UNICEF South-South cooperation unity at the country level, and currently leads the UNICEF Brazil South-South cooperation agenda. And he is an anthropology by training, born in Sweden, and currently lives in Brasilia with his wife and 2 sons. And last but not least, our third speaker, it's Mariana Rocha. Mariana is Program Policy Officer at the WFP Center of Excellence Against Hunger, where she supports developing countries in the development of national school feeding programs. She holds a Master's in Human Rights and Democratization and Advanced Law degree. Thank you very much, you all, for being here with us, and I really hope that we will have like a very enriching discussion. I'm going to start with Guilherme. So Guilherme, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mariana. Sorry, Laura, for the introduction. It is a pleasure to be with you all here. I find those opportunities to debate with an audience in the themes of evaluation and others very interesting. Not only because the theme is interesting for our work, but also because I'm a sociology professor and I really do like the debate. Today, however, I will put on my hat of bureaucrat, and I will focus more on a governmental agenda in what I will say. That is to say, I will not enter in the debate very technical about the evaluation part, but try to focus on how evaluation is important for our project and for the Brazilian government, and how we started with the concept of trilateral South-South cooperation, which we are building right now, and trying to input a methodology of evaluation in its middle, and to work with it since the beginning. So to that, I need to go briefly into the history of what is South-South cooperation. We all know that South-South started with the Buenos Aires Conference in 1978, that we call in Portuguese PABA, in English is PAPA, and that conference defined what would be the characteristics of a horizontal cooperation between countries of the global South that would help each other to develop, by literally showing one showing to the other what they're doing, and how that can help the other to build their own agendas of development. The focus is on capacity development, capacity building, and on the exchange of information without the lead necessarily, or the bigger part of one country, one specific country, imposing itself on another. So to that, the Brazilian governmental agency, Brazilian Cooperation Agency, with that has been working in the various years, and with more recently, in 2008, started to develop the concept of trilateral South-South cooperation, which is basically the same thing, the South-South, with the help of international organizations. We understand that those organizations need to be in the same level of cooperation than those of the countries. So it is a little different of what's normally known as triangular South-South cooperation, because that emphasizes one of the three parts. In the trilateral one, we put everyone in the same level and work together for development agenda in one issue at a country. The actors remain the nation states, but the international organizations help with their capacity, with their technical expertise, with their presence in the world. They help in fostering the development agenda. That's a work, however, that is very new. As I said, it started, we've been developing the concept actually since 2008, so it's very new on the one side. And on another hand, it is a work that needs to be taken care in what relates to tools that we use to do it. So the international organizations, normally they have tools to do evaluation, monitoring, planning, and etc. And that's all very important, but we need to find tools in this trilateral configuration that suits the two or more developing countries that are cooperating and the international organization at the same time. That's very easy to say, but it's very hard to do. So it has been a very interesting exercise that we are trying to do in the later years. Evaluation, as we know, is important to be done in two different aspects or in two different moments or parts, as you may want. The first one is evaluation of the work itself. So we have a planning, and we do a work, we implement what was planned, and we have to evaluate if that was done right. So that's the evaluation of the process. Another part is the evaluation of the results. So it's not only because we planned and we executed correctly and we had good results in what relates to the execution, the process of execution, that we are going to change the reality. So we also have to evaluate the results that we pursued. As a very simple example, if we are referring ourselves to the project we are just starting with UNICEF, which is a cooperation between Brazil and the country of São Tomé, we have the plan to foster and reduce vulnerability of families. So we have an agenda of work to do that. We may do all the work, and at the end, the families do not reduce their vulnerability. So we may evaluate well the process and not the results. What we want, however, is the two, a good process and good results. That's hard, as I said, and because of that, we need to do a very careful work, and many times to have specialized work helping us with the evaluation part, to really understand what we actually have of results, how our project affected the results, and how to move forward from that. To that, we use external evaluation, and that's how, in this partnership, a specific partnership between UNICEF and Brazil, how we got to Articulação SUL. We hired them to help us evaluate the whole partnership and all the projects that we've been doing right now. We are, however, still in the process of doing that, but we do have very interesting results so far with foreign governments specifying that our work was very important to help them achieve some development issues that they wanted to solve. We are also, in this partnership, trying to innovate in what relates to the methodologies and tools to evaluation. And we are at this time doing a work of developing a system, a methodological system of evaluation that passes by 3 points specifically. One is to develop a methodology of work, another an informatics system or an information system, a computer system to help doing that. And the third part is to use all that in a way that we can actually evaluate, monitor, and evaluate our projects more precisely and with real time, in less time. I'm not sure if you can do that in real time, but at least with less time. So that's something that we are developing right now, and it's not yet done, but we already have the expectative that it will generate results not only to this partnership with UNICEF, but also to support all the trilateral South-South cooperation agenda that we carry on in the Brazilian Cooperation Agency. And we hope that this process may also be useful to other areas of the Brazilian Cooperation Agency to support all the ideas that are behind the South-South cooperation projects, not only the trilateral one. That's yet uncertain, but we hope to achieve that. We believe that this work has potential to that. So I believe that with all that I said already, I discuss a bit the first point that Laura pointed, which is how do we use evaluation? And also, I believe that it addresses what I could say in less words about lessons learned. I believe that the first lesson we've all learned is that evaluation is not easy, that it is an ongoing process, but that it is essential to guarantee, as I said, the results of the project, a correct approach on the results of the cooperation projects, not only of the management part, but of the results part. The challenges are that, once again, it's very easy to say all of that, but that's very, very hard to measure because results can be influenced not only by the work we do, but by other questions. For example, if we are doing work with a country that is already on a spiral of development itself with its own politics, we will show, Brazil will show what we did to have our spiral of development, to foster our development, but that may not help the other country with their process. And they will, in the end, get results anyways, because they are doing their process correctly. So evaluation helps us determine if it is the work we do as South-South cooperation and trilateral South-South cooperation that resulted in something, or if it is already a national project going on. To have that is a huge challenge, but it is a very important answer because it makes us work better in what is the cooperation part, what is the project part. And that all relates pretty well with capacity development, not only to the teams that work with the cooperation, so to the management of the cooperation, but also to the cooperation itself. The whole purpose of South-South cooperation, be it trilateral, triangular, or other modalities, is to develop capacities. That's why we do this modality of cooperation. I remember everyone that international cooperation is not only South-South cooperation, but South-South cooperation is based in capacity development. That's what we look for. So we believe that if we evaluate well the work we do, if we have the indicators that show us exactly where we achieved results, how we achieved them, and that our project functions as it should and delivers what it is intended to, we then develop capacities and advance in the development agenda. Without further ado, that's what I had to say, and I will give the floor back to Laura. And thank you very much, everyone, to listen and to participate in this event. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Guilherme, for sharing the perspectives of ABC and for raising some interesting topics that I'm pretty sure next speakers will also touch upon, and also during the Q&A, for instance, how easy, as you said, taking back your words, it's easier to say, but not so easy to implement, and how difficult it is as well in terms of to get the right indicators to measure what you do. And the relevance that you see for ABC to be kind of engaging in this kind of monitoring and evaluation efforts. So thank you again for sharing that. You've mentioned the partnership with UNICEF, and our next speaker is Niklas from UNICEF Brazil. So very happy to hear from Niklas as well in terms of his perspectives on the same topic and how UNICEF is actually seeing those efforts to increase monitoring and evaluation in Brazilian South-South bilateral cooperation. The floor is yours, Niklas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And well, first and foremost, thank you to the organizers for the invitation, and thank you also to those who are attending and those who will see this recorded version later. And also thank you very much to ABC for being here. I know that the agenda is difficult on all ends, and I think that the fact that Guilherme is here with us today shows that to the government of Brazil this agenda is a priority, which I'm very pleased to see. And as Guilherme mentioned, we are working on methodologies and so forth to improve this agenda together. So it's really great to be here together with Guilherme also. My presentation will be, well, basically, first I will just sort of introduce some of the concepts to see what they mean in the UNICEF context, and then also present briefly what the structure looks like for the time being in terms of how we work with South-South cooperation in UNICEF here, and in particular sort of set up with the government of Brazil. And lastly, I will sort of walk you through what have been the process so far since we got started on this, and sort of to illustrate a little bit what we have learned along the way, and where we are right now and how we see the future, as to also respond to the guiding questions introduced by Laura. So next slide, please. So first of all, just to introduce South-South cooperation from the UNICEF point of view, in our strategic plan, on the global level, which is sort of the plan that guides all our work within our mandate, South-South cooperation is seen as a strategy. So it's not a program as such, but more a means by which to achieve the mandate of UNICEF. And this is important to point out, because this in itself, although it is a strategy that we strongly believe in, it also brings a few challenges to us, because as you will see later on in this presentation, the way that we work with South-South in UNICEF Brazil specifically, it's more like a program setup. And that sort of brings a little bit of some challenges sort of internally to the organization as to how to think through thorough frameworks for monitoring and evaluation. Next slide, please. When it comes to capacity development, which is also, it's not only in the core of South-South cooperation, as Guilherme said, but it's also very much in the core of what UNICEF does. And what I'm presenting here is just to show that the way that we understand capacity, we have different levels of capacity development. So you have it on a sort of what we refer to as an enabling environment, where you have more like the policy level, legislation and budgets. And then you have the more institutional level, where you have processes and frameworks and systems, and then you have lastly at the individual level. And I think it's important to point out these 3 levels, because this is also where what we see in the South-South agenda, that often, or I would say almost always, it's important that these levels sort of work together throughout the South-South process. So whereas we work at the technical level with counterparts, it's also very important to work at the policy level, because that is where the budgets are allocated and where, you know, decision making takes place. So it's important to work on these different levels. Next slide, please. And so in terms of evaluation for UNICEF, is also part of sort of what we call, you know, the core of what the organization does. And we are very strict with evaluation being very sort of systematically done and also impartial. So it should be something external to what we do in terms of programming. And that's also why we have an evaluation office specifically working on this area. And usually in the country programs at the country levels, we have, you know, officers assigned with the role of monitoring and evaluation as a specific sort of function. And why do we evaluate? Well, it's first of all to you know, to understand better the achievements of both expected and unexpected results, because I think that's also important to say that most often there are unexpected results, and it's important to understand those. And the way that we use evaluation, or like one of the reasons why, 3 of the reasons why, is that first of all, it informs the way we work. So we use it to learn, and we use it to take decisions. And it also obviously has to do with accountability, because we need to report to donors, we need to report to our member countries. So it's also about, you know, an instrument to show results. And then it's also something that we work around in terms of capacity development, because we believe that, as Guilherme said, for countries to better understand their own processes of advancements and the results, and, you know, take decision on allocation of budgets and so forth, it's also important to have the evaluation as an integral part of you know, policy designs and planning and all that. So we work very closely with governments around evaluation, and that's also what we do with ABC in South-South specifically. Next slide, please. So for the Brazil country office context right now, as I said, South-South is a strategy, so it's part of our country program, which is signed off by the Brazilian government. And whereas South-South cooperation started to us as a specific area within the program setup, we are nowadays incorporated into the program area of social policy, monitoring and evaluation, and South-South cooperation. So as you can see in this slide, South-South is sort of one of 3 pillars within a larger framework of a programmatic setup, which to us makes a lot of sense, especially since we are working very specifically on monitoring and evaluation within the South-South agenda for the time being. So it's very convenient to have this sort of within the same program setup. And also on social policy, given that much of the demands that sort of generated the whole setup of the program was very much within social protection and social protection related areas where UNICEF work across the world. So it also makes sense to have it within that specific sort of area, programmatically speaking. Next, please. So the way we work, it's basically, we see it as a 3-pronged sort of approach, where we have the more what we call sort of policy dialogues. It's more like where we work, for example, where this work around evaluation, monitoring and evaluation comes in, is where we work together with the government to sort of, you know, how can we, you know, sort of in a way influence the way that South-South impacts on children, and how can we better understand how these South-South processes sort of benefit or not children, and as well at the same time developing better tools to sort of understand those processes better. And then we have the more technical cooperation part, where we have the specific initiatives where we work with different countries depending on the demands of those countries, where we try to bring out, you know, the whole capacity development aspects of as to working with institutions and public officials of other governments as to promote capacity development. And then we have the knowledge management area, which is more related to generation of evidence, sort of looking at good practices and trying to understand how is it that these practices work, and what are the key sort of elements behind success, and sort of make those available to others as well. And just to illustrate on the right side of this slide, this is basically sort of the workflow of how we go about when we have a demand from some country and we sort of respond to it. So we go through this process where we have, we have a request, and then we have sort of discussions online over Skype or video conferences as to sort of to understand the demand better, and then we have a scoping mission where sort of which is the basis for the design of the project, and then we go on about implementing the project, and lastly also looking at the lessons learned and the evaluation of the initiative. So that's sort of a very sort of time-consuming process, and as Guilherme also said, remembering that one of the principles of South-South cooperation is that it's horizontal and participatory. So it sort of also is always a setup of multiple sectors of people from different institutions and different countries working together. So it's sort of also a very sort of challenging environment in terms of practical issues of getting managing to set agendas, and and also language aspects where we work with countries from all over the world. Sometimes language is also a great challenge. Next, please. So this is just to show how we try to bring together sort of the programmatic approach of UNICEF with human rights and sort of a results-based approach to management with the South-South principles. So this is sort of what we see as a framework for our program. I'm just rushing a little bit because I see I'm running against time. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is sort of the chronology of what we have done so far and where we are. So in 2012, this is where we agreed with the government of Brazil to set up this program to work together, so to attend to the many requests that came from other countries, many of which were in social protection, but also other areas within the UNICEF mandate. So then we set up the formal sort of programs. We signed a global MOU where we agreed more or less of the lines of actions of each actor and rules and responsibilities. And then we set up a unit, which was a specific program unit within UNICEF Brazil as part of the country program then. And as we went along, we discovered, because this was a lot about sort of learning by doing approach, because we were the first within UNICEF. We were the first unit sort of ever set up, and it was not really clear how to operationalize South-South cooperation. So it was a lot about learning from how we were doing things and sort of analyzing sort of case by case, and then we discovered that we needed some more sort of structured framework to work around, and that's where we developed the trilateral South-South cooperation guidelines in 2015, which were very much based on the formal guidelines of the Brazilian Cooperation Agency, but also sort of to incorporate the UNICEF point of view of things. So that's why the whole child rights agenda comes in, and so these tools, these guidelines, helped us to better structure the cooperation process around indicators, results, as to how is a specific demand linked to specific national policies in a given country, and so forth. So that helped us a lot to get some structure to the program. And in 2016, we did a small assessment as to understand a little bit what all these processes entailed in terms of results, so in terms of in what way the exchanges with Brazil contributed to advancements in these countries. So that was an interesting exercise, and what came out very strongly in that exercise is that we needed better tools to monitor and evaluate the program, because as up until then we didn't have much systems in place in terms of we had we had the guidelines, we had mission reports, but they were sort of saved in our computers, and we didn't have a system that sort of brought all this information together and, you know, helped us to better understand the change process of the agenda. So based on that, we started to sort of move ahead towards the development of a monitoring, evaluation, and learning system, where we are right now. And in 2017, we went into a new country program process of UNICEF Brazil, and this is where South-South agenda was incorporated into the social policy and M&E framework. And based on that, we are currently working on an external evaluation. So I'm not going to go into results from that work right now, because we are in the middle of the process. I guess in a few months' time, probably we can come back with some more concrete results around that. And also with regards to the monitoring and evaluation system, I think I'm ahead. I think I'm already past the time limit, but just quickly mention this monitoring and evaluation system, which is very central to where we are right now. We have done a very thorough analysis of the program, the way that it works, the way that sort of change takes place, and this has been done through a series of interviews with counterparts from Brazil and elsewhere, as to sort of understand the logics of the program. And based on that, we have developed a theory of change. And this theory of change then will also inform the results framework, which in turn we are now planning to sort of put into practice through a sort of a pilot system that Guilherme also mentioned, that how can we sort of make something systematic in terms of how we capture central information and data inputs, and how we can sort of transform that into knowledge and learning and, you know, reporting. So that's where we are right now. And our expectation is that both the evaluation, which we believe will bring us the end results by the end of the year, and also the advancement that we have done around the MEL system, that this will inform our sort of future program design. So we are moving towards the next country program, which will take place. It will start in the 2022. So I think we are sort of well placed to, you know, based on these exercises that we are going through right now, we will, you know, have a better informed program design in the future. So next slide, please. Just mention quickly some challenges and lessons learned, sort of based on what I've been saying. So you had first sort of strategy vis-a-vis program setup. So we are the first sort of country office of UNICEF that has a program together with the government, which is kind of sort of a unique setup and very sort of Brazilian specific. But I think there are important learning that can come out of that. So we are working together with headquarters also around to see how, in what way can we make use of what we learned this far, to also think through sort of a larger strategy, a lot of setup within the organization globally, as how can we work with countries around these kind of agendas the way that we have been doing with Brazil. And also the results-based management vis-a-vis a demand-driven agenda. This is also a challenge, because we try to plan around results, but since our agenda, the program with ABC, is very much built on demand, sometimes it's difficult to find a common base around which we will sort of plan. So that's why we have this theory of change developed, that is sort of the larger scope of the whole program. So once we have a demand, and once we understand that demand better, we will be better placed to frame that within our larger theory of change, so we can understand each and every specific initiative from within a large sort of theory of change perspective. And then we have the contribution vis-a-vis attribution, because I think from our side, I think it's difficult to reach attribution. And this is something that we have discussed a lot when we went through the discussions around the monitoring and evaluation and learning system. Because very much what we manage to monitor and follow up on is the contribution side. However, given that UNICEF and many other UN agencies have the presence that we have, and we follow through on these processes on both ends, I think we are well placed also to, you know, to go even deeper and understand what Laura also said. How can we think about the beneficiaries and the indirect beneficiaries? Because to some extent, from a South-South perspective, the beneficiaries are sort of government officials, right? but at the same time, the indirect beneficiaries are sort of the direct beneficiaries to UNICEF in those countries. So I think there is, we can advance. I think we should try to advance further to see how we can make those linkages better, work together. And then we have the aspect that Guilherme mentioned around the multiple stakeholder. It's very difficult to work around these agendas because there are many actors involved. But at the same time, that's what we sort of see as the added value, because we have the buy-in of everyone involved. So we have something, a sort of a common and joint construction, which I see very productive on the long term. And then what the evaluation brings, and this is sort of, we have been in the practicalities of this in this current sort of recent months, is, when we try to get hold of key information and data, and as in the case of our program, we don't have the system in place, so we need to sort of go searching for the data, and that means interview people that were involved in the processes. And both the UNICEF and government are, to a large degree, rotation within their institutions. So it's also very difficult to find people that were actually involved in a certain action, because now they might have been in Algeria at one time and now they are in Thailand. So that's sort of a very practical challenge, and also shows the importance of having a system that, grasp and sort of collect the data as things happen, so we can better understand it. Another challenge is that South-South cooperation is very much often seen as sort of an add-on, and I think that goes both for UNICEF and for government, because in the case of Brazil, I think often the officials engaged in South-South, it's sort of on top of their daily work, which is also challenging, because they might need to go on a mission for a week, and then they're sort of 1 week delayed with the work that they needed to do in Brazil. So that's also very challenging, perhaps not specifically to M&E, but it's still a challenge. And the information management, Guilherme mentioned it, I think it's key to have a system that gathers information that we need. And so in terms of lessons, I think we need to better understand capacity. I think within the South-South setup, I think it goes beyond training. I think and I think the 3-level approach that I mentioned in the beginning, I think can be helpful to also think at the policy level and sort of how change happens, so we can actually report on some kind of results that might not be that concrete always. And that M&E needs to be integrated in the whole process. So I think without a good monitoring, there won't be a good evaluation. So I think that's a key learning as well. And I also think that what the MEL system development for us showed clearly is that a system will not solve our problem. We need to have also a good governance system in place. So we need to have clarity on who is responsible for what and by when do we need to do certain things, because unless we have that, the system won't do it for us. So I think also it's like a human touch to the system that we need to figure out and improve. Next slide, please. So yeah, so this is where we are right now. So we are hoping to develop a pilot sort of system for the monitoring and evaluation and learning, and that's something that UNICEF sort of is supporting ABC in doing. So it's, as Guilherme said, expectations are that this will sort of go beyond the UNICEF ABC setup and it be something more institutionalized within the Brazilian government, and finalize the evaluation. And based on that, we will move ahead and develop the next country program and the next program set up together with the Brazilian government. So that's basically where we are, and I'm really happy to be here, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niklas. That was very rich, and I think you raised, you actually complemented some of the points Guilherme raised, but also you brought so much into the table, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna have time to discuss some of those issues. I'll just put one on the table for you to reflect, both you and Guilherme, and then during the Q&A we can come back. Guilherme mentioned the kind of harmonization challenges, that was his words. And I think you also brought in your presentation, you actually brought something that was the 2015 trilateral South-South cooperation guidelines. So I was wondering for you too, if you could afterwards discuss whether in these guidelines for the program, some of those harmonization challenges, including those related to monitoring and evaluation, were addressed. And if so, how exactly you did it, what kind of harmonization you put in place. So if you could give us some examples, I think it's going to be very useful. You also brought something very interesting about the need for theories of change and the ways in which South-South cooperation and interventions on capacity development need a lot of effort on theory of change to kind of reconstruct what are the rationales and rethink what are the processes through which this capacity development is happening. I think Mariana, our next speaker, which was also involved in the evaluation of the Center of Excellence Against Hunger, also dealt with this idea of theory of change. And this is just like a soft transition to our third speaker, which is Mariana. So if I'm not sure whether you will touch on theory of change, I think it's also important for us to reflect on that and whether this kind of tool is useful to think about monitoring and evaluation. So please, Mariana, the floor is yours. Thank you so much again for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you to the organizers of this discussion, also to the attendees who are now with us and those who will see the webinar later on. So I'm representing the WFP Center of Excellence Against Hunger. For those who are not familiar with it, this is a specific office of WFP that was created in 2011, initiative of the Brazilian government that decided to establish a unique partnership with a UN agency to accelerate its trilateral cooperation efforts. So the center supports developing countries in developing their national food and nutrition security policies. It is very much focused on capacity development and in supporting to develop these frameworks that for many countries are still to be developed or improving the national programs. We do this through South-South exchanges. It started with exchanges with Brazil and mostly African and Asian countries, but with time we also evolved to do more cooperation among other partners. So for example, within the African continent or within the Asian continent to foster these exchanges. Our operations are guided by the principles of South-South cooperation, so horizontal partnerships, national ownership, recognition, and mutual benefit. And this is something that we really embed in how we approach our technical assistance to partners. Since 2011, the center has received over 30 delegations in Brazil and supported over 30 countries in developing their national programs and the related management mechanisms to have these programs that are led by the ministries of the government instead of international organizations. And where these conditions are created, we support the governments in the transition process in their leadership to implement the programs. This has resulted in 18 national policies that have been developed on school feeding. And if we take the indirect beneficiaries of our cooperation, we're talking about over 4 million school-age children that are indirectly benefiting from our initiatives. Besides working on trilateral cooperation with the Brazilian government, we have also fostered, as I said, interregional cooperation, especially within Africa, because we see the value of these exchanges. And this has led to the establishment of the African Union School Feeding Cluster, a forum that is dedicated to exchanges on school feeding within the continent. And because of the format of the Center of Excellence and the type of cooperation we undertake has drawn a lot of interest from different countries, we have also seen that other middle-income countries are interested in establishing similar centers. So since the center was created, a Center of Excellence, a WFP Center of Excellence was also created in China And more recently, a Center of Excellence was created in Côte d'Ivoire, in Ivory Coast. So overall, the center is promoting the contribution to the national school feeding programs. And our M&E system has very much been influenced by this process. So just to share with you the context of how the M&E approach has developed within the center, I think the first point that is important to highlight is that when the center was created, it was a completely new office within WFP. It had a unique structure that was not similar to other country offices or liaison offices, and that led to what Niklas said. We also had to learn a lot by doing, and of course that influenced how the monitoring and evaluation system was established. From the outset, there was also a significant demand for cooperation to the Brazilian government on the school feeding program. So since the beginning of the activities, there was also a great number of countries that were asking to come to Brazil, and therefore the activities were very fast-paced from the beginning. And as well, because the establishment of the center was at the initiative of the Brazilian government, and the government was very much involved in all activities, and our operations were also strongly influenced by its approach. So within this context, we have a couple of milestones for how our M&E has evolved since 2011. Firstly, in 2012 and until 2013, one could say we were very much activity focused, receiving a lot of delegations to Brazil to share the Brazilian experience, and attending to this great number of requests for countries to learn more about the Brazilian experience with a small team and not many resources allocated to monitoring. After the second year of operations, we started to develop a proper monitoring system that was more focused on these study visits, the delegations, their compositions, and we started to gather more data on how these study visits were taking place and to report and communicate more about that. And that was the emphasis of our monitoring from 2013 to 2015. And it was also during this period that we started doing in-country assistance, in cooperation always with the WFP country offices, but to send our experts to these countries to help in the development of the national programs, policies, laws, depending on the request of the given country. In 2016 and 2017, that was when we had our evaluation, our impact evaluation that was focused on the first 5 years of activities. As Laura mentioned, this process really brought to evidence the need to strengthen our monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems, the need to have a stronger management information system, and to have a clear theory of change, which went beyond the logical frameworks that we had foreseen in the projects. So it was also a learning process to engage in this evaluation, and it helped us to strategize for the next steps, also considering the recommendations that I'll talk a bit about soon. From 2017 onwards, we started to strengthen our data collection in our partner countries, and also strengthen the documenting of the experiences of these countries to share through knowledge management. And we also decided to use the knowledge and the experience we had acquired with the evaluation to channel for greater alignment with the global WFP systems. Since when the center was created in 2011, South-South cooperation was a fairly new thing to WFP. And those systems started to be created throughout the years. In 2015, the organization adopted a South-South policy. But the corporate indicators did not reflect the type of work that we do, and that's why we have invested on actually incorporating our work into those global indicators. So going back to the evaluation, as I said, it was an important process to learn about the gaps that we had in terms of information, but also to see what was going well and what was not going so well. In terms of results that the evaluation was able to capture, I think it's interesting to highlight how the center has contributed to inspire ownership and support of domestic coalitions for change, and that means national governments in our partner countries having more of a leadership in agenda setting, in multi-sector collaboration and government investment. Also, with regards to capacity strengthening, these governments, after collaboration with the center, have demonstrated increased capabilities to lead the agenda, improve the coordination, but also the institutional frameworks. And beyond that, as I said, the center also invested in the intra-regional cooperation. This was also captured by our evaluation as an important outcome of our work. And finally, the fact that because we were very innovative in our arrangement, we also contributed to WFP's and the Brazil government's own systems to South-South and trilateral cooperation. The evaluation also served for us to learn that we needed to improve our in-country assistance, so to be more present also in the field. And that was the next stage, let's say, as countries first came to Brazil, learned from the experience, established their goals in terms of policy development. They started to request for this specific assistance in country, and that required more presence in the field, and that's something that the evaluation captured quite clearly and has served for us to also improve our engagement since. Another area that evaluation pointed there was significant room for improvement was in terms of knowledge management, further documenting experiences and going beyond documentation of the Brazilian experience to also document the experience of other partner countries. So this is also something that we have done following this evaluation. So in terms of usage of an M&E tools, they have been used, of course, for program management. We monitor the key output indicators in terms of countries assisted, stakeholders involved in cooperation, the products elaborated. From the outset, we have fostered a cooperation and let's say, food and nutrition systems that are embedded in multi-sector stakeholder. So for us, it's very important that our engagement with the partner countries also reflects that. And we have seen that because of the Brazil leadership in this area, an example, we have been able to mobilize stakeholders from areas that were normally not so involved in these policies. And also we use our monitoring system to track the results and how they evidence the stronger national school feeding programs. So for example, through the policies or strategies that were developed, the resources invested in national programs. Another usage of our monitoring system has been accountability. It's a very important area to communicate clearly to the partner countries on what we have been doing, to our strategic partners, and also to donors and the wider public. And finally, learning is also an important dimension. As I said, some of the results of the evaluations have been used to guide programmatic decisions since 2017. In terms of challenge, I focused my challenge a bit more on the evaluation process. So the first one is, as I mentioned, we have been working in a very fast-paced environment with a large number of requests for cooperation, and this has impacted the time allocated to thinking about the systems related to how this cooperation was being developed. So the evaluation gave us a clear understanding on the need to reflect about those systems and improve them. Also a challenge we faced is because when the center was created, South-South and triangular cooperation was relatively at an initial stage, and the monitoring frameworks were also even more at an initial stage. So the basis of common experiences or common knowledge that we could build upon was rather weak, and that of course influenced our own learning. Another challenge that we have observed is in terms of planning and resource allocation to M&E systems. As Niklas said, the fact that South-South cooperation is demand-driven, of course, it impacts our planning capacities. But also there is a challenge that adds to it, is that the projects do not always have very significant resources to allocate to monitoring. So this is an area where we see there could be more improvement, and this of course impacts the results of our monitoring systems. For us, there's also been a change in our focus, in the focus of our work. So as I said in the beginning, the center was very much focused on study visits, and as cooperation evolved with a number of partner countries, our activities started to be more focused in these countries, and that of course impacts on what are going to be our objectives for data collection and what exactly we're monitoring, but also, as the next point also mentions, how to actually collect data, because we rely on these partners to regularly send data, and as Niklas said, normally South-South cooperation is an add-on to other responsibilities that these governments or the WFP country offices have, and it's challenging for them to be providing all the data that we need in the time we need, combined with their other responsibilities. Another challenge that we have, I think, for most South-South cooperation initiatives is actually to capture impact. We're talking about developing policy frameworks, improving the systems of these national programs, and this of course takes time. And most of the time it goes way beyond the duration of a specific project. So by the time these frameworks are actually impacting the beneficiaries of these programs, it might go often beyond the time of evaluation, and it remains challenging to capture this impact. And also, as Niklas said, this is very much connected to the point on attribution versus contribution. I think by virtue of South-South cooperation, we should not be talking so much about attribution, because none of the partners are engaging in this process or taking the leadership in this process by themselves, but it's really about horizontal relationships. So I think we should focus our efforts on building stronger contribution, justification and analysis around contribution, then focusing our efforts on finding the best way to capture attribution. And also a challenge that we had with our own evaluation is to actually have the ownership by strategic partners of the evaluation results. We know that evaluations are very technical documents and very long documents, so we saw that this has to be translated through different communication avenues and has to be revised repeatedly to ensure ownership of the evaluation results. Which brings us to our lessons learned. So what we have learned with the evaluation was the value of a strong theory of change and how it helps to capture the complexity of the initiatives. For us, as for UNICEF, during our evaluation process, it's when we actually built a proper theory of change for our work. And it was very useful to understand the different dimensions of our work and the connections and assumptions that we were working with. Also, a lesson learned for us, and this is something that we have worked on, is the importance of aligning ourselves with the WFP corporate indicators, and we have been quite successful in achieving this. Because WFP systems have been there for a long time and they're very strong and well developed, so we need to make sure that they are also aligned with the center's needs, even though our office's nature and activities differ from most country offices' activities. Another lesson learned is the allocation of resources to have solid monitoring systems, and that is actually going back to basics, but having dedicated monitoring human resources to collect data systematically and do the analysis and ensure that there is regular and systematic attention to this issue. And as I mentioned, ownership of evaluation results, it's something that should not be taken for granted and should be looked at as much as the evaluation, because otherwise you will have a very comprehensive document whose results and findings are not disseminated and are not actually do not influence the learning process, be it of our own organization or our partners. So in terms of lessons learned, our lesson would be that connected to the evaluation, it's very important to elaborate a communication strategy for disseminating the results. To do so through multiple communication materials, so not only have like this long report, but to have brochures and other materials that can be multiplied and easily accessed, and to hold dedicated technical sessions with our strategic partners to go through the results and use this to inform new programs elaboration. So in terms of future outlook, the center is now looking at further enhancing its information management systems. We're also seeing how we can use new capacity development systems that are being developed by headquarters. We still want to do more focused research with emphasis on the qualitative indicators to capture the South-South dimension very clearly in our cooperation with specific partners. But also the indicators base could be further expanded and better integrated, both with the Brazilian government, especially with the Brazilian government South-South indicators. And we also hope to continue in these exchanges with other UN agencies, which have been very fruitful as this one, because as I mentioned, we're often talking about small teams that do not have staff fully dedicated to M&E, and as this process of having strong monitoring and evaluation systems for South-South cooperation, it's still relatively at a beginning. It's been very useful for us to engage in these discussions. So that's it from my side. I'm happy to discuss the other questions with you.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Great add-on into what we just heard. I think now we are ready for the Q&A session. We still have pretty much 20 minutes. We have received some questions, but do please send us more. We also have our own questions, and I'm pretty sure that the different speakers can also think about questions to ask each other. I'm going to raise a couple of questions that we received, and please, again, those who are actually with us right now, do not feel shy to send us more questions. There was one question on, very first question by Samuel Ching, that it was about data and information system. So the question, and I think it's to be honest, I think all the three speakers could address it, which is whether the existing M&E frameworks you have, so at ABC, at UNICEF, that the one that is actually being designed, and the one in the center, whether it's linked to systems of information management, and whether those data are actually speaking to each other, so it can be more a kind of automated process, or you are thinking about using something that is not exactly open. That was the first question. The second question that we got is related to something, is from Fidelis Ukume. So I think it's actually for Niklas, but I wonder whether others can also chip in. It was related to that idea of South-South cooperation being an add-on for governments. And how can we, actually, how in your experience, what you learned in terms of what are the kind of motivating factors that can actually make governments more willing to take part in South-South cooperation, but also to evaluate South-South cooperation, intellectual cooperation initiatives. Another question that we would have in terms of something that Mariana actually just mentioned, it's about the communication. So, and then in that sense, I think I invite also Guilherme to discuss a bit that. How is, for instance, ABC communicating its results? To whom it's communicating its results? It's about international partners, it's about domestic audiences, it's about the partners itself, other countries. But what exactly is, for instance, ABC doing in terms of communication? Mariana explained a little bit how they are communicating, but I think it's also interesting to hear from ABC in that regard. Let me see. We do have another question here from Melissa Pomeroy. So she asks, so considering that the human and financial resources are actually a constraint for South-South cooperation, how can actually organizations improve their monitoring and evaluation system without overloading teams and partners? How are you dealing with those financial constraints? I'm going to stop right now and then actually hand the floor to you so you can actually reflect a bit, and then I'll come with a second round. So maybe Guilherme, you can start.
So the floor is with me, Guilherme.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, Glenn.
Okay, so I will try and answer the two questions that the three questions actually that you just put right now, and there is another one which is about details on how ABC plans to move the SSC M&E agenda forward, considering ABC's coordinating role. Laura had posed two other questions before about the harmonization challenges and how they are being addressed in the guidelines that we have with UNICEF, and also about the theory of change. So I will start by answering those questions first, because I believe they help in the process with the other ones. So the harmonization challenges. We have a common goal, which is the one of achieving development through South-South cooperation. And I think that is something that we have to agree in a work level, first of all, and then to try and see how we can work together. But if we agree that working together makes sense, to use the words of my boss, Cecilia, if we see that the work we do makes sense, the harmonization and other challenges they come easier. So what we did with the guidelines was that we tried to find out what was important in the work to UNICEF, as we do with other international organisms, for example, the Center of Excellence with WFP, right, and ILO or others. So what we do is we try to find what's important to the organism, and we show our methodology, which is already developed. And by law, Brazil has to, or not by law, but by regulation, we have to follow our methodology of work. So what is important to the organisms have to make sense and to be harmonized with what Brazil already defined that the work should have and the process that should be followed. And by doing that, what we did with UNICEF primarily, and what we try to do with other organisms, is to develop instruments, for example, models of documents that we need to construct and use during our projects together. So that's the first part. The other part is to harmonize that with the foreign countries' agenda. That can be very hard when we cooperate with countries that have strong cooperation agents as ABCs, because they already have a cooperating agenda too. So, but once again, if the work makes sense, the rest is something that is a matter of sitting down and doing together. So that all poses challenges, and that sometimes reflects in years of meetings and of discussions and of writing material. But we believe that that's all worth, because in the end, we will have instruments that make sense to the two partners in the case of Brazil and the international organism, and the cooperating country as well. And so we can move on with using those instruments in our cooperation. That's also what's behind the theory of change. By theory of change, what we really mean is the change we want to have with the cooperating efforts. So we need to have that set up before. We need to know how we want to affect the world with our work, and what we expect to change in the reality before doing the work. We cannot simply do cooperation with other countries with the help of international organizations without knowing before that we want to get somewhere. So that's pretty much, it is a tool to work, but it is pretty much a philosophy as well. And that's embedded in the instruments we use. And once again, it's a work in progress. So we try also to sharpen our instruments as we move forward. And that's how it should be, of course, because evaluation also gives us results on if the work's not being done right and what we should improve in the work itself. So we use those results to sharpen our instruments and move forward. So there was a question on how the new systems of monitoring and evaluation that we are developing right now are linked with the existing ones. Well, inside Brazilian governments, inside the Brazilian Cooperation Agency, we have already different information systems that we use to monitor projects and to input data and information and to make sense of things. They are really monitoring instruments. The evaluation is done by analysts on field, and the results of evaluation, which is also instrumentalized by our regulations, the results are also input as information in those systems. So that's one thing. The new system will, of course, have a dialogue with this existing one, but it is not already developed. So I cannot answer on how the link will be done because it's not already developed. But I can answer that they will work in the same organization, and they will serve different parts of the project, of one existing project, but that are linked together. So that's a challenge that needs yet to be addressed by the development team that we are at this moment hiring, and that will be done in what will be the system of information level. There is another level, which is the methodology of the work. We cannot simply have information systems. We need to have a methodology that makes the information system make sense to the work. So in this level, it is easier because we have all the other instruments of the partnership. We have all the work that we already do. We have all the expertise that we are developing and the experience of working together and the information that we already generate. And that all being constructed in a methodology of working together, and further on that will lead to whatever information system we end up developing. So on the results, how and to whom the results are being communicated, that's a very interesting question. So what we do as government in what relates to South-South cooperation in Brazil is to respond to demands. So we do not engage in South-South cooperation if we do not have a demand to do so. To be very clear, we do not go to a country, for example, I don't know, Argentina. We do not go to Argentina and start a project there if the Argentinian government does not ask us to do so. So that puts us in the position to answer the first thing of results. Governments cooperate. So we have to communicate results to government. That's the first thing. And of course, governments they need to be held accountable to their societies and all the complexity that is involved in that. So the second part in a project is, once we are answering a demand, is preparing information that can be used to the construction of public policy. Of course, we do not, as projects, construct public policy, but we instrumentalize the demanding government to do so, to construct governmental programs, to construct long-term policies, and we offer the information. Actually, once it is a partnership, we produce the information during the project, and all the involved people systematize the information and offer that as results of the work, and to the foreign governments that will use that to inform their own society while constructing their policy. Once again, that's very easy to say, but it's very hard to do. But governments already do have their way of sharing information and of constructing their work with their own societies. In what sense to the Brazilian part? In Brazil, we have a transparency law. So whatever information we construct in our projects can be assessed by anyone. They can simply ask. So and we have to give the information. And that's pretty much how we communicate. We answer questions, and we give the information we produce to whomever asks. And well, I guess that's it. Well, I did not answer the one question, but my time is up. So I believe we'll further on address other points if the floor comes back to me.
Thank you very much, Guilherme. In fact, just to make sure, both for the speakers here, but also for those who are watching us, we do have a way through the social protection platform to actually get the questions that were not addressed. We can actually write the responses, and then they will be posted in the webinar page, which I think it's a very nice way to keep this conversation and also to address things that we won't be able to address in the conversation, because we have like a time limit So I'll just move to Niklas, if you could reflect on the things that we discussed and the questions, and maybe on monitoring and evaluation. I mean, the difference between them and how you're focusing your efforts in, trying to construct both at the same time, evaluate, but also construct systems to monitor.
Okay, so I'll try to be very brief. Just to also address the question from, I think it was Fidelis, on the add-on issue. Just to clarify also, I think two aspects I think that contribute to that sort of challenge. One is that the agenda as such is demand-driven. So that means that sometimes it's difficult to incorporate these efforts into planning processes because you don't really know what kinds of demands that will come up. You can mitigate that by sort of, when you have sort of a longer term sort of project agreed, obviously then you can better also plan your time in alignment with plans of action within that project. So it's more for the sort of spontaneous demands that come, and when it's not in planning processes of institutions, then they have to see how they can cope with that add-on work. And also I think another issue that it's important to mention, I think when we have sort of smaller sort of evaluation discussions around missions and exchanges, we often see that is a great added value to the institutions in Brazil that cooperate with another sort of demanding country, because it helps them also to advance in their work. So it's always sort of a mutual learning process, and I think that's something that is not yet clear enough sort of understood and communicated. So I hope also the evaluative work that is ongoing now will also bring out more evidence around what these corporations actually bring in terms of benefit for, let's see, so the providing sort of institution. And that might help also, mitigate a little bit this add-on challenge. Melissa asked, how to improve M&E considering financial constraints? I think one strategy for that is to do sort of what we are right now doing, sort of to, first of all, bring together an effort to sort of evaluate and better understand the results that we are actually achieving, that we have achieved up until now. Once we have a better understanding of that, and once we see the added value of this agenda, and if that shows us that, okay, it's worthwhile continuing investing in this agenda, then I think the aspect of having a sort of a proper M&E work around that comes as a sort of automatically, because at least to UNICEF, as I said, evaluation is an integral core of what we do. So if we decide to develop further and invest further in South-South, we have to put resources also to M&E. So that's sort of my expectation. My hopes are that would be the way. I think I will leave it there because I know that we are actually running out of time. So for Mariana to have some minutes as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Just to kind of emphasize again and again for the questions that we were not going to be able to address, and then and also for people to have more time to reflect on their responses, we're going to try to respond then afterward in writing. But yes, please, Mariana, go ahead.
Okay, so going briefly through the different questions that were asked. So quickly on the management information system, as I had mentioned, we do have a system, but it's not automated. It doesn't create automated data. So that's what we want to develop in the near future, because we see, that clearly increases our capacity to monitor our work. Engagement, Fidelis' question about engagement and motivation factor. So our experience is that very often, in addition to different exchanges that happen between the government, it's very useful for the staff, the team of the international organization that is involved in the project to be present in the country for longer periods and to work with the government staff in the partner countries to support them in being more engaged in the project, because we see that these officials have many responsibilities, and which are very often a priority for the government in terms of actually managing the program, and very often they don't have the capacity to engage as much as we would have hoped in the South-South cooperation project or initiatives because of those responsibilities. So having in-country presence really makes a difference. And I think that's also the added value of the UN organizations in these partnerships, because we have capillarity and we can ensure through the country offices, through the experts that are coming from Brazil to support these country offices, we can ensure there's more regular presence in the technical assistance that is necessary to go beyond the initial exchanges. So I think there's a clear added value there. In terms of resources, the point raised by Melissa, I think one point that could be suggested and considered for future projects is to have a standing percentage allocated to M&E. That's something that the donors could foresee for South-South cooperation. We know that this is foreseen for other types of projects already for certain donors. And I think also, going back to one of the discussion questions for the seminars, in terms of evaluation, we actually need to start looking closely into efficiency. And that might mean different requirements for South-South cooperation, but the challenge of measuring efficiency is not only about whether it's South-South cooperation or not, but it's very much dependent on the nature of the project. If you take a South-South cooperation project that is not oriented to capacity development, it's more of a road construction or whatever, it's easier to assess efficiency in such a context. While if you talk about human rights, or if you talk about policy framework, it's much more difficult because there's also the comparison element that is important for analyzing efficiency, and it's not always a given to find that. So in this regard, I think we should build on what has been developed. I don't know if the participants are familiar with the indicators developed by NEST. It's the network of certain think tanks. And they looked at different dimensions of South cooperations and suggested indicators that can be used. So, and for cost efficiency, we can talk about the ratio between budgeted and actual costs, the ratio between planned and actual implementing time, average duration of initiatives, lack of bureaucratic delays, time and costs of South-South initiatives compared to North-South initiatives. And we could also look at cost-sharing measures and complementarity activities that this project's envisage. So yeah, I'll stop here and over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Mariana. It seems like we have more questions, but we are actually running out of time. What I think I would like to do is actually just to kind of wrap up a bit the discussion, but this is definitely not the end of the discussion. We do have more questions that were asked to our speakers in terms of kind of unpacking what capacity building is. We have much more questions in terms of the trade-offs, in terms of human resources and the technical and the methodological dilemmas that one faces when one moves when one progresses in the very idea of what those South-South capacity development activities are and the kind of collaboration it's happening. And pretty sure that there will be other challenges in terms of when the results of the evaluation, for instance, of UNICEF and the system is actually working, and the kind of data challenges that we will find, and the kind of communication challenges and lessons learned that we'll be able to share in the future. So just to say that in a nutshell, that this is just the beginning of this conversation. It's actually not the beginning, but it's a kind of a new step in the conversation that we have been having from ASUL side, but also together with partners ABC, UNICEF, and the Center of Excellence. So on my behalf, I just wanted to be sure that I have thanked you enough for participating, for taking the time to have this conversation, to share your own personal and institutional views on this topic. And for those who attended with us today and those who are actually watching us later, to be in touch and to keep this conversation going through the digital means we have, but also the opportunities that we will also have in terms of face-to-face interaction among this community of practitioners in South-South and South-South Triangular Cooperation. I'll just leave it there from my side, and I want to give the opportunity to Guilherme, Niklas, and Mariana also to say their final words, and then we close the session. Once again, saying that we'll be taking some time to respond to the questions that we received, but couldn't address through the webinar. So Guilherme, and then Niklas, and then Mariana.
So once again, thank you, Laura, thank you, Niklas, and thank you, Mariana. This was very interesting. I thank Articulação SUL for inviting us to the webinar. I believe that moments like this one are very important for us to gather more experience and information to move forward with the work. Because of course we want to be accountable for what we do. So we talked a lot here about information, how we deliver information, how we use that to construct new projects and to move forward with cooperation. And I believe that it is in the interaction with everyone, with interested people, with countries that are receiving or giving us technical cooperation on whatever matter. I believe it is in the dialogue amongst everyone that we actually can make our projects better and move forward with our work. So I thank you all a lot. I will take time and have great pleasure to answer the questions that come right now or after, and send them all through the proper mechanisms of the webinar. Thank you, Laura, and thank you all for participating.
Okay, so well, from my side and on behalf of UNICEF, I also thank you very much. Thanks to the organizers and to those who attended the webinar. I think from what we have seen in the presentations and also from the questions, I think it's evident that we need these kind of discussions. So I think it's really a good initiative, and I think it's also like actually it is an example of South-South cooperation in a way. Right, so I think this is what it's all about: learning together and sort of advancing. And I think, I mean, at least I don't have any concrete answer to many of these questions. I think these are things that we are all struggling to sort of figure out. And I think together, I think we will move ahead faster and better. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much on behalf of the WFP Center of Excellence Against Hunger in Brazil. It's always very useful for us to take part in these dialogues. Thank you for the interesting questions, and I'm available to also answer some more questions in writing you may have. And thank you also to Articulação SUL for the important role it plays in moving this agenda from a policy perspective, and to engage so many organizations in thinking and devising good systems, not only for monitoring, but for South-South cooperation as a whole.
Thank you so much all. So that's the end of our session, and do keep in touch, and let's keep this conversation going. Thank you again. Have a nice day, and see you soon.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.